What is going on, Governors? Chisgule here, and today we are going to be talking about our good friend Cao Cao. We're going to do a detailed commander guide. If this is the kind of thing you want to learn more about and see other commander guides, you should totally subscribe because we're going to do a whole heck of a lot of these. With that said, let's get right into it. When we do a commander review, we look at a couple things. We start with the skills, we then dive into the talents, we tackle how you can actually obtain the commander, and then provide you some optimal pairings and closing thoughts. Now, it is worth mentioning that the reason we start by reading out these skills is that although I know you can read themselves, you'd be surprised how many times you uncover something you didn't realize was there. And since the game is still relatively new for most of us, this is a pretty good activity. So let's get a look at these skills. For Cao Cao, the first one is Dragon Rider. It deals direct damage with a max damage factor of 1400, decreases their attack by 40% at max, and decreases their march speed by 10% at max for 3 seconds. This is a very powerful nuke that profoundly reduces the amount of damage that your unit is going to take and starts to slow down the enemy. Powerful. Next up is a Barbarian Battling Talent, increasing damage onto barbarians by an upwards of 50%. Followed by Tiger Knight, which increases cavalry unit march speed and attack by 10 and 30% respectively. Finally, Lofty Ambition increases, or rather gives the troops' normal attacks a 10% chance to heal a portion of slightly wounded units at a max healing factor of 1000, and restores rage at a max rage restoration of 100. It also increases your troops' march speed by 20% for 3 seconds, which is unlocked, by the way, at the very first level. That doesn't go up over time. And that effect can only trigger once every 2 seconds, but that's still pretty gosh darn frequent. The final skill, if you can manage to obtain all of the sculptures for a legendary commander, is Emperor of Wu Wei, or Emperor Wu of Wei. And this increases cavalry attack by 25% and decreases cavalry defense by 10%. This passive skill has actually changed around a number of times, but I love it in its current form. Now, with all of that said, if you were starting to skill up Cao Cao, I would start by maxing the first skill before you level him to 10. From there, I would do kind of what I'm doing right now. You can take him up to level 30, but I wouldn't proceed any further if you want to put a bunch of additional sculptures into these other 2 skills, and we'll do that in this video. And only after you've sort of put what you think is a reasonable number of skill ups into those first couple skills should you then level him up further. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about his talents. Cao Cao can go in some interesting directions. He has got a cavalry tree, a peacekeeping tree, and a mobility tree. Let's get a look at those. Now, I currently haven't assigned any of Cao Cao's talent points, and that's because I've just been using him as a secondary commander, and I'm not totally sure what I want to do with him yet. I'm pretty sure it has to do with mobility, though. Let's start with peacekeeping, because I think this is the most straightforward. The peacekeeping tree is exceptional against barbarians, and I recommend it highly. Some of these talents, including the amount of damage you do during a raid, and even this talent over here, which increases your damage to barbarians, I think are generally underrated and are very powerful. If you were to build him as a peacekeeper, by the way, I would go all the way down this peacekeeping tree, see how you like Curing Chant, before you would go and explore other branches. Now, the mobility tree is the primary reason you would use Cao Cao over other similar commanders as the primary, and it offers some interesting stuff. The most noteworthy is the talent Hasty Departure, which increases your departure speed when you leave a structure. So you march 60% faster for the next 10 seconds, which is a really big deal. The way you use this talent is to march from structure to structure across the map, and I believe this includes, farming locations on the map, like lumber mills, farms, and so forth. Very, very powerful. The other mobility talents are less game-changing, but I think are still kind of noteworthy here. Um, One makes it so you're more resistant to slow effects. Another makes it so that after defeating an army, you go faster for a time. And another makes it so that you go faster when you're out of combat and slower when you're in combat. All in all, if you want to move very, very quickly with cavalry, the mobility tree is quite good for that, and I don't think there's anything better in the game. With that said, a strong contender is a full cavalry unit. And if you wanted to use a full cavalry unit, you would be hunting for talents such as march speed for cavalry, another march speed for cavalry, and march speed for cavalry again. Picking all of those up starts to get you moving really, really quickly. Also, you could look at the bottom branch for thoroughbreds in the peacekeeping tree. You can pick up another cool 18% by picking up the talents along that path. Ultimately, you would want to get to the top talent in the cavalry tree for increasing your DPS, but on your way up to that point, you've got some choices to make. You're ultimately trading DPS for mobility or vice versa. I personally, when I do level up Cao Cao, I personally am going to try out these mobility talents to see what I think, and I likely will use him as the primary commander in a cavalry unit for PvP for that reason. We'll talk about pairings in a bit. So, if I have convinced you that Cao Cao is a powerful commander that you might want to use, he's kind of an interesting commander to unlock. His sculptures come from a number of places. First, there is a pack, a daily special offer. We'll go take a peek at that. You can also obtain him through keys, specifically gold keys. He can be obtained occasionally in the Expedition store and through universal sculptures, and we'll use several of those on Cao Cao momentarily. What I want to do very briefly is review with you that's not where that is. Review with you briefly the daily special offer over here. And these 3 packs have a Warlord's Ambition chest, which currently contains Cao Cao. My understanding is that this will rotate, so it might depend on your kingdom what it currently has. You should always check if you're not sure before you buy the pack. And the pack goes from $1 to $3. The $3 pack, I think, has a lot of really useful stuff in it. I've got a separate video where I talked about this a little bit. I'll have a card over here where I talk about where I think your best buys might be. If you want to get the maximum number of Cao Cao sculptures, you're probably buying this $1 pack very frequently. If you want to get the maximum amount of value, I think action point potions are very, very helpful to store up. And I also think the gold keys have the potential for a lot more value than the silver keys do. So with that said, who might you pair your Cao Cao with if you want to be using him? And there's a couple combinations I would recommend. The strongest combination, arguably, in the game is Minamoto with Cao Cao. Both cavalry commanders, huge amount of synergy. The key difference between them is that Minamoto has a nuking tree, and Cao Cao has the mobility tree. And I think mobility is king in most PvP situations, which is why I think probably you would use Cao Cao as the primary commander in that configuration. I already have Minamoto at 5 stars, so I'm currently using Minamoto as that primary commander. It takes, by the way, something like, it took me 130, so I would guess on average it's probably like 150 gold stars to get a legendary commander to 5 stars, and in the realm of like 320 to 350 to take a legendary commander to 6 stars. So you have to choose wisely where you're going to invest, and you probably only get to pick one primary commander to invest in that is legendary. Now we ought to talk a little bit about cavalry units, and that is really what Cao Cao is designed to amplify. One such choice is to use Pelagius, and if you did that, there's a couple things to consider. If you're using Cao Cao as the primary, you still can get those mobility talents, and Pelagius will make you have a harder hitting unit. I think this is good but maybe not the very best choice because I like to kind of min-max. I like to go all in on a strategy when I'm investing in a strategy, and your options for that would include Lancelot and Dragonlancer. Personally, I would pick Lancelot over Dragonlancer because he's a stronger commander overall. Lancelot's got some nukes, but has also a cavalry march speed bonus and a march speed bonus when the unit that he's in is weak. For those reasons, I think Lancelot is a very powerful pairing with Cao Cao. With that said, if you were looking at pairing Cao Cao with really any commander, using him as the secondary, you're going to get a lot of value in situations against barbarians and in situations where you've got a lot of cavalry. We've already talked about the cavalry units, but I'll call out a couple things. The first is that this damage reduction is very powerful. This means you could pair Cao Cao with someone like Joan of Arc, who offers a lot of sustain, to amplify that sustaining effect. Similarly, Cao Cao has healing, which amplifies in its effectiveness when you're working with an army that is geared toward that. The other thing that you might consider when doing pairings is the damage to barbarians. And I think that is very, very powerful. As an example, Cao Cao would make a great pairing with Boudica, who also, again, has sustain and also damage to barbarians. I suppose the anti-synergy here is that I don't know that their attack reduction stacks, and that obviously is worth knowing. If it stacks, then that's really incredible. If it doesn't, then it's less exciting. Now, I promised you I would skill up my Cao Cao. Before I do, I mentioned earlier that there were those packs that have Warlord's Ambitions. Let's open up the 3 Warlord's Ambitions that I have and see if we get a whole bunch of statues of Cao Cao. My experience has been that it's like you get 4 sculptures or so for every 10 of these Warlord's Ambitions that you open, but let's rip these 3 and see what we get. First up, Silver Key. I've gotten a lot of Silver Keys from these. Silver Key again, and the last one, an Epic Commander Sculpture. Like I said, the Cao Cao sculptures are pretty rare to get from that, but it's one of the best ways to actually exchange money for legendary commanders in the game. There aren't a lot of ways to do that typically. So, well, let's power up a couple skills on Cao Cao. I've been waiting to do this to actually have an audience for when we do these skill ups. I really do think that the damage to barbarians and the passive skill for march speed and attack bonus are very, very strong and worth waiting for. Getting a tiny bit more healing and rage restoration just doesn't feel as important to me as those other talents, or rather those skills. So let's convert some of our generic sculptures over, and we're going to do 8. It's going to take 30 sculptures. We're going to confirm. And we're hoping, honestly, either of these two, I'm really, really happy. The Tiger Knight is obviously better for both PvP and is good in PvE, but this is better for PvE. Let's see what we get. I'm happy with that. PvE damage boost is a big deal. My kingdom's at peace, so I'm using these guys for a lot of PvE content. Let's fire this up again. We're going to send 30 more sculptures over. Confirm it. And one more skill. All right, spreading out evenly. I'm very okay with that. Pretty happy to have these skilled up. And now it takes 40 sculptures. This goes up pretty fastly. I believe the next one is 45 sculptures. We'll see how long I can be patient before I unlock this lofty ambition. So my friends, I hope that this guide was helpful. If it was, please do like this video and subscribe. It means a lot to me as a relatively new content creator. If there's anything I missed, let me know in the comments. Would love to hear about it. And until next time, my friends, you have fun smashing the kingdom.